Good evening, everybody. Will members take their seats? Welcome to the Cheltenham Borough Council's Planning Committee, being held on Thursday, the 20th of November 2025. My name is Councillor Garth Barnes, and I'm Chair of the committee. This meeting is being streamed live to Cheltenham Borough Council's YouTube channel, and the recording of the meeting will be held for 4 years. If there are any breaks in transmission to the YouTube stream, the meeting will be adjourned for a short period until any issues are resolved. If you are here to make a representation to the meeting, you are consenting to the use of the sound and video recordings for broadcasting and training purposes. Please be aware that CCTV and audio recording is now in operation in the public gallery, and the recordings will be held by the Council for 5 months. Also, please note, a fire alarm test is not expected, so if the alarm does sound, you should immediately make your way to the nearest exit. Okay. On to the agenda then. Item 1, apologies. No apologies. I think we've got a full house tonight, so that's good. Item 2, declarations of interest. Anybody declaring an interest? No, that's thank you. Declaration of independent site visits. Anybody? No? Oh, Councillor Bamford.
Yeah, so I visited the site just off Church Lane. I didn't visit Glenfall Way because I've run past it a million times, and I think I know it quite well. Thank you.
Thank you. The agenda, item 4, the minutes of the last meeting, which have been circulated. Are you all happy that they are true record? And I can sign them as such? Okay. Oops. Item 5, public questions. We have none. So move on to the agenda, item 6, planning of applications coming before us. And the first one is 6A, land adjoining Leckhampton Farm. And I'd like to ask Ben to introduce the case for us, please.
Thank you, Chair. So this application site relates to a parcel of land located to the south of Leckhampton Farm Court and is accessed from Church Road. The submission is a Section 73 application where the applicant is seeking planning permission to vary condition 2 of the original consent, which relates to the approved plans. The changes in this case relate to house type changes and associated layout changes. The application is at committee at the request of Councillor Horwood, whose main concerns relate to environmental impacts, but also reference is also made to the concerns raised by the Parish Council. So here we have the site location plan and a Google Earth image. So the site has an area of approximately 2.84 hectares. It's located to the northeast of the junction between Church Lane and Farm Lane in Leckhampton. The road junction forms the edge of the Cheltenham boundary, with the land to the west within Tewkesbury Borough. The Hatherley Brook runs along the eastern boundary of the site, as does an existing public right-of-way, and the site is covered by a tree preservation order and is occupied by a number of orchard trees. To the south of the site is Church Road, which forms the edge of the Cotswold National Landscape and the green belt. To the northwest and west of the site is land which is allocated as local green space. So here we've just got some site photos. The image on the left is taken from Church Road. The other images are at the site entrance. So just wanted to touch on some of the planning history and the background here. So in 2021, planning permission to develop this site for 30 houses was refused by the local planning authority. The main refusal reason relating to harm to the Cotswold National Landscape. The local planning authority's decision was allowed at appeal, and the permission is extant, not expiring until the 12th of September 2026. The Section 73 application was submitted earlier this year for house type changes and associated layout changes, but was withdrawn following concerns raised by officers. Just the background of how this application has now come about is that Redrow Homes were the applicants for the consented scheme. However, they've since sold the site, with it now being acquired by the current applicants, New Dawn Homes. It is understood that New Dawn Homes has not given consent to build the approved house types, and as such has been required to submit an application for new house types. So here we have the comparable site layout plans. So on the left is what is approved and extant, and what is proposed in this application is on the right-hand image. So just to confirm, there's no changes to the number of dwellings, and the overall site layout is the same, with open green space, landscaping and SUDs located in the same areas, and the access is unchanged. The proposal provides a fully compliant affordable housing proposal with 12 units included. So here we've just got the different house types. They're all on there. They're all part of the information pack. I'll just run through them quite quickly, but they vary between detached finished in a Cotswold stone or reconstituted stone. They vary in form and design. We have red brick versions, feature corner block buildings. There are also terraced or end of terrace properties, varying in finish. So here's a street scene. So the top image there is the approved scheme, so the Redrow scheme that's extant, and below is the same view, so from Church Road, as it were. The images are slightly different, appreciate that, but I didn't have comparable ones. So there's a 2D street scene and then a CGI image of the proposed scheme below. This is just to give an example overlay to show the differences. It's quite hard to see the differences in many ways, but here the red outline is one of the approved house types, and the comparable new dwelling on the same plot is in black. So it's important to note that there is an extant planning permission, and this is a Section 73 application. And as such, the only relevant considerations are in relation to the proposed changes, which in this case relates to the house types and designs, and the minor associated layout changes. Matters such as principle of development, access, etc. cannot be revisited. The key planning matters here are site layout and design, impact on the Cotswold National Landscape, impact on the green belt, neighbouring amenity, flooding and drainage, parking and highway safety, climate change and sustainability, environmental impacts, impacts on trees, impacts on the Beechwood Special Area Conservation, biodiversity net gain and ecology. So just to touch on the summary recommendations, so the council cannot currently demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply. As such, there's a presumption in favour of development. The main benefits of this scheme are the contribution of 30 additional dwellings to Cheltenham's housing stock and 12 affordable units. In its revised form, the site layout, scale, form and design of development is considered acceptable. It's also acceptable in terms of impact on neighbouring amenity, BNG, ecology, impact on trees, drainage, access and highway safety. Increased harm to the Cotswold National Landscape or Greenbelt has not been identified, and therefore a strong reason for refusal is not identified, meaning the proposal complies with paragraph 11D1 of the NPPF, and any adverse impacts of the proposed changes would not significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits of the scheme. Therefore, the proposal complies with NPPF paragraph 11D2. So given the above, offer the recommendation is to permit the application subject to conditions and varied Section 106 and unilateral undertakings with regards to affordable housing in SAC mitigation. So here, I'm not going to run through them all, but here are the recommended conditions. These, in the main, reflect those imposed by the inspector when they granted the appeal. There's 2 additional conditions which have been agreed with the applicant with regards to sustainability and climate change matters. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. We have a number of speakers. And I will just say this for one time because I don't want to repeat it all the time. Every speaker has 5 minutes to speak. I am very strict on the time limit, and I will let speakers know that they have 30 seconds left of their remaining time when it comes to it. So please, all speakers, note that, and hopefully we will get through it fairly quickly. The first speakers I have on this is Mr. and Mrs. Ringrose, who I understand are going to share their 5 minutes. So if you would like to come forward. Would you like me to advise you after 2.5 minutes, or are you going to share it a different ratio?
We are not going to share it. I'm going to do the entire thing, and it should be significantly less than 5 minutes.
Okay, that's fine. That's
that's
lovely.
all right.
Thank you.
Right. We live at 8 Leckhampton Farm Court, which is located directly to the north of the site, and on two sides of which several of the proposed dwellings, garages and car park are planned. The first issue we want to raise is that of surface water drainage. We are concerned that the levels on our boundary might be changed without consultation, and therefore we would not have the opportunity to address related issues that this throws up, such as our vehicular right-of-way across the site, as well as potential flooding issues. We want to be consulted, if possible, about the impacts of levels and drainage issues. Secondly, it is imperative that the boundary treatment around our house follows that approved by the planning inspector in September 2023, which is to say a 3-metre buffer and a 1.8-metre close board fence. The relevant drawings included in the inspector's report are referenced PL05D and PL03H. The design and access statement dated June 22 also confirms at page 34 that a 3-metre wide green buffer has been introduced to provide screening for the existing properties off Leckhampton Farm Court. Despite mentioning this boundary treatment in comments we made in both April 25 and July 2025, New Dawn Homes plans do not appear to confirm either the buffer or the fence. In the current application, the latest site plan does not show the fence. This means that on approval, the site plan that becomes an official document, then becomes an official document, and the status of the fence is in question. This is of great concern to us because we are relying on this buffer and fence to limit the impact and intrusion of the development, as well as providing privacy and amenity to us as residents of an existing property. We were reassured that the planning inspector clearly included the buffer and the fence. We are now concerned that if these features do not appear in the site plan taken forward, there is no guarantee that they will magically reappear in the landscape scheme. To make the situation absolutely clear, we need a condition in the approved plans which ensures that a 3-metre buffer and a 1.8-metre close board fence are included around 8 Leckhampton Farm Court as approved by the planning inspector in documents PL05D and PL03H. Such a condition would also ensure compliance with Joint Core Strategy Policy SD4. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Ringrose.
Thank you.
Can I now ask John McCready, the applicant's representative, to come forward? Same conditions apply.
Good evening, Chair and committee members. I'm John Newlands McCready, a chartered surveyor specialising in residential development. Thank you for the opportunity to speak in favour of New Dawn Homes Section 3073 planning application to amend the house types and minor changes to the scheme by Redrow approved on appeal. As consented, it is a low-density scheme for 30 homes, including 12 affordable homes, and is located between Leckhampton Farm Court and Church Road. Our original application to revise the Red Road permission was withdrawn following a meeting with the Parish Council and discussions with the planning officers. This new application has been progressed to resolve all of the concerns that were raised. And during the course of the application, several other minor amendments have been made as requested by your officers. You have a very comprehensive committee report from your planning officers that recommends this site for approval. I will try to address the issues that Councillor Horwood has raised in the report as his reasons to bring this application to committee. 1. Design, materials and house scale. The road access point on Church Road and the number of proposed homes is unchanged from the consented scheme. The internal road layout and house positions are virtually unchanged. The retained trees, drainage arrangements, footpath linked to Farm Lane, etc. are all as previously approved, and the similarity of both schemes is clearly demonstrated on the overlay plan 13105 Reb C. The planning officers showed you the two side by side, but there is an overlay plan, in fact, available. We believe our bespoke house designs are far more appropriate to this very special location in Leckhampton than Red Road's nationally standardised arts and crafts style house designs. As requested, the proposed brick and stone materials have been revised, and during the application process, the proposed ridge and eaves heights have been reduced to broadly match that of the consented scheme, and your officers, now at paragraph 6.9, quote, consider the amended house types to achieve a high standard of design and appropriate use of materials for its location and context. Item 2, environmental impact. The environmental impact of development in this location has been contested for many years. However, this issue has already been decided by the appeal inspector when granting the Red Road permission. New Dawn Homes are doing nothing to change this situation. To be more precise, your officers tuned into the importance of this issue, required design alterations, and your officers now advise that the overall scale and bulk of the current proposal is not dissimilar to the Red Road approval, and consequently advise at paragraph 6.17 that, quote, do not consider the proposed development would have any greater environmental or ecological impacts than that of the consented scheme. Regarding sustainability, the officer's comment at paragraph 6.35 is very slightly incorrect, as it is our intention to fully comply with the Cheltenham Borough Council Climate Change and Sustainability SPD, and the proposed, quote, all-electric heating system will, of course, utilise the latest energy-efficient air source heat pumps, and our homes are A-rated and have low carbon footprint. 3, foul drainage capacity. We understand there have been queries about the foul drainage capacity in the area. Severn Trent confirms that there is capacity for this site and that they do not have performance issues indicated in their network. They are investigating the concerns raised by the Parish Council about drainage smells, but do not believe it is a capacity issue. 4, affordable housing mix. We have made minor changes to the affordable housing mix from the consented Red Road scheme. We have revised the 2-bedroom rented first floor masonettes with living rooms at the first floor, and they are adjacent to the luxury properties at Leckhampton Farm Court.
You have 30 seconds.
Thank you. We've replaced these with 2-bedroom houses for rent with ground floor living rooms, a much better design solution. So we believe this is a positive design revision to reduce the neighbours' overlooking concerns. Your housing enabling officer confirms that the proposed house designs are acceptable and meets with the council's housing needs in this location. The additional build costs will be subsidised by us, and the rents to the housing association for both properties will be very similar.
Could you bring it to a close, please?
Yes, sir. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you directly, and as a small Cheltenham-based family company, your support for this application in accordance with your senior planning officer's report would be appreciated. Thank you all.
Thank you, Ms Macready. Now ask Councillor Horwood if he would come forward and speak. You know the system well, so...
Just a bit. Thank you very much, Chair. And I'm going to start by saying that, first of all, I think that this does represent an improvement on the original Redrow consented scheme in some respects. And I actually welcome the fact that New Dawn in general has engaged with the local community, has complied with the climate SPD, and has made some amendments to the scheme. However, and I'm afraid there's always a but, isn't there, in these things, there are a number of things that relate not so much to whether or not the scheme goes ahead, but certainly to the conditions and how you look at the enforcement of those conditions that I would really like to emphasise. You've heard about one, and perhaps you should make a condition that that buffer is restored between the residents of Leckhampton Farm Court and the development. The Parish Council has raised issues, as you heard, about foul drainage. This is being sort of dismissed by Severn Trent, but there have been really serious problems in the immediate local area resulting from the very large Redrow development across the road, 377 houses, which has caused constant complaints in the lanes and Bryson Lane just further downhill of foul smells, and there are real concerns that we're about to add to that problem. So again, the technical check on what Severn Trent has said, I think, should be a condition of what you agree. But most of my concern is about the environment, and I have some sympathy with the objectors who've talked about the destruction of the local environment. And I'm afraid Ben's report, I think, is very good, but it makes an important point at 1.6 that this should be read in conjunction with the appeal inspector's report. But I'm afraid it doesn't really uphold that, because there are some important things in that inspector's report that are not even referred to in this. One is a local policy that you haven't even been told about. And it's in something you're going to have to get used to in this part of town, which is the Leckhampton with Wardenhill Neighbourhood Plan. Planning law says that once this reaches an advanced stage, it has to be given considerable weight in planning decision-making. It is now at examination. That is practically the end of the path, and yet you haven't been told that policy LWH4 specifically refers to green infrastructure, and it specifically lists this site as a site of extreme ecological importance. And it is. It's mapped in the local nature recovery network as of importance for ecosystem services, including biodiversity, food provision, carbon storage, orchards, woodland and stream habitats, soil health, water connectivity, and most importantly, nature connectivity. This is a connecting site between what's now called the Cotswold National Landscape and the local green space in Leckhampton. So it's an important wildlife corridor, and the stream and the woodland on the side of the site are really important. And unfortunately, this comes in the context of an initial illegal demolition, or alleged illegal demolition of trees, which the Borough Council is looking into enforcement on, and that is referred to in the report. Also in the inspector's report is something which is referred to in Ben's report, which is the paragraph that says, let me quote, the framework does not state that such valued landscapes should be immune from development, but rather that they should be protected and enhanced. But I'm afraid the report then mixes up the valued landscape with the Cotswold National Landscape. That is not what the inspector was referring to. If you read the previous sentence, it's clear. However, the additional concern I have found arises from this site being in a valued landscape, not next to it, in it. This is not the Cotswold National Landscape, it is Leckhampton's valued landscape. And he is absolutely explicit at paragraph 16 of his report. Overall, I share the views of the characteristics of this land identified by the previous inspector, considering its mosaic of uses, its history and its network of footpaths, field and mature vegetation as positive attributes. I therefore have no basis to depart from the findings of the Secretary of State in a previous appeal. Consequently, it would be within the constrained area, and I am of the view that the appeal site 2 is within a valued landscape. Now, we have repeatedly made the point, and it's made very strongly in our neighbourhood plan, that valued landscape under the NPPF is an important consideration and you have a duty to protect and enhance it. It's not even mentioned in this report, I'm afraid. So I think we're not saying don't develop, but we are saying the condition, which is a landscape and environmental management plan, perhaps ought even to come back to this committee to be checked to make sure that it is rigorous and enforced and really does protect the enormously valuable
Could you bring it to a
wildlife,
close, please?
vegetation and habitats. And thank you for hearing me, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Now we come to members' questions. Any member who wishes to ask questions of the officers? Sorry, Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Chair. Just want to ask what the scope is for adding the conditions that were suggested by the speakers.
So the scope of conditions recommended at the moment are those of the inspector. So we have added 2 additional ones because we felt that they weren't captured at all, and that was with the agreement of the applicant. So it goes beyond that in that respect in terms of sustainability. I suppose this is a new permission. If there's a material planning reason to add another condition, then yes, but you'd have to demonstrate what, why a further condition would be needed. So the conditions at the moment reflect that imposed by the inspector.
Thank you. Councillor Oliver.
Sorry, does that take into account the 3-metre green buffer?
So that wasn't a condition specific on the inspector's decision, but obviously it's reflected by the plans that were approved. But the one that would be further captured by is the landscaping plan at condition 8, which requires full details of hard and soft landscaping to be submitted and approved. The site layout plan submitted in this application that's being considered does show a hedgerow to be in that location as well. So we haven't got exact landscaping details in this submission because there's a condition that requires the full details to be submitted.
Thank you. Councillor Derby.
Can I just clarify with regard to these conditions? Because earlier on the speaker was saying that all concerns raised were addressed. I think those are the actual words that we used for an earlier consideration of these conditions. The condition in particular with regard to the buffer, I don't know whether it was raised earlier. I didn't see any notes on that. But are you saying that that can be added as a condition this evening? And the second question I had was with regard to what Councillor Hallwood said about the doubt in his mind and of other people's mind. By the way, I know the situation there because I used to be the county councillor there, about whether the Severn Trent are able to cope with the extra foul water system, the smells that are claimed by local people. Can it be a condition that we do, as was suggested, go back to check what Severn Trent are saying, or is it actually the case that Severn Trent, being experts, you can't actually go back and check it? How would you actually check the views of an expert in water management like Severn Trent? Is it possible to have a condition which says, go and check on what Severn Trent are saying to see whether they're telling the truth or whether they're being accurate? So that's about those two conditions. One is that first one about the buffer and fence. Can we consider that tonight? Can we say yes, potentially, to that being a condition? And secondly, in principle, can we at all go back to Severn Trent and say, in effect, we don't believe what you're telling us so far? So those are two questions.
So with regards to Severn Trent, no, I don't think it would be appropriate to put such a condition on. We have consulted with Severn Trent. They have confirmed that there's no issues. Not that there's no issues. They acknowledge that there's issues raised. They don't have any flags of issues in their system. But I think what you also have to remember is the type of application that this is. So this is a section 73, so there's an extant permission. This is the same number of dwellings as approved. So there's no increased pressure by, if this was a new application for 40 houses, then I can imagine there'd be some further merit in that. But given that there's the same number of dwellings, but just changes to house types and designs, I would suggest that, no, there's not really any scope to go beyond what Severn Trent have confirmed. With regards to the buffer, as I said before, the site layout plan does show a buffer, if that's what you want to call it. There's an area to the south of the boundary with number 8 Leckhampton Farm Court. It does show hedging. The details of that specifically would be captured in the landscaping plan. The depth of it, it wouldn't be appropriate to condition something that would mean a further change to the site plan. So in measuring it, there's a buffer there. It's not to the same extent as the approved site layout scheme if you're taking the measurement up to the closest built form, which in this case, on this scheme, is the garages. It's the detached garages. I could show you if the... Hang on. Can we go back to the presentation? So we're talking about this location up here specifically. This is what we're talking about. So the boundary running along, you can see, you can't see the mouse. So where it's not coloured in that where that corner is on the red line, that's where the neighbour is talking about. So like I said, there is a buffer there. There's a hedging shown to be there that would be captured in a landscaping plan to know the details of what that is, as well as what the boundary treatment is. But the depth of that isn't exactly the same as approved. But does that answer your question? Thanks.
Councillor Wheeler?
No, I think mine was the same as Councillor Dobie. I was very concerned about that hedge and fence and wonder if we could condition that, but I think officers have covered that.
Councillor Howell?
Thank you, Chair. I'd just be interested in the officer's response to the points raised by Councillor Horwood with regards to the Leckhampton and Warden Hill neighbourhood plan and how that was considered. I imagine, given its extant permission, that it potentially wasn't a part of the report for that reason, but I would be open to hearing your comments. Thank you.
So it is something that's obviously occurred and gone through the process further since the original application. But yes, what you've suggested there is this is a Section 73 application, so we're considering the difference. We're not considering it from scratch again. So we're considering the difference between the extant scheme and what is proposed, and whether any changes result in harm, and whether that harm provides a clear reason for refusal, or whether that harm amounts to sufficient amount that would outweigh the benefits as required by paragraph 11.
Councillor Andrews?
Just inquiring, the affordable housing, the 12, how does that break down between social and shared ownership?
Sorry, I was just trying to get to the right page. So it is 5 social rent, 3 affordable rent, and 4 first homes. It has been extensively reviewed by our housing officers, and they amendments have also been made in line with their comments, and they are confirmed that it is fully compliant in terms of what Cheltenham needs currently.
Councillor Foster?
I understand that there has to be a plan and a timetable for the planting of new trees and shrubs. Presumably that's the landscaping plan. And it is an area where trees are obviously very important. I just wondered about that timetable. Are Do the trees have to be planted before residents move in the same way as solar panels have to be installed before the residents are in? Or how much leeway do developers have on the timetable of a landscaping plan? I suppose I'm thinking of Councillor Horwood's comments about enforcement. You know, how do we enforce that that is actually done?
That is all captured within the conditions already suggested by the inspector. So that the condition says that prior to the commencement of development, the details shall be submitted to and approved in writing by the local planning authority. So that will be as part of the discharge of condition process. Within that, it says it has to detail all specifications, and then it further goes on to say all hard and soft landscaping work should be carried out in accordance with the approved details within the approved timetable. So part of it needs to be, that's part of what the submission will need to provide. Yeah.
Councillor Bamford.
So developing Councillor Allen's point a little bit, can I tease out something with respect to whether or not the fact that this is now considered a valued landscape is fully reflected in the conditions that we've been able to impose? Now, you may well say, well, actually, there's no difference from one to the other, but as I understand it, the valued landscape does confer certain protections and enhancements. Are we saying we can't now impose those because it's only a section 73, or that they're there anyway? Thanks.
So if you were to add a further level as such, you'd have to identify a reason. So what change in this application would require us to go beyond what is approved and the conditions that are already controlled? So you'd have to identify a reason based on the changes submitted for a further condition.
Sorry, I thought that's probably what you were saying. My question then really was, were those built in the original and therefore reflected in the inspector's consent, or is that something we've missed out on, but we can no longer capture? Thanks.
I don't think it would be up to the conditions to make an assessment or to deal with impact on the the landscape value. That's the assessment. That's what the inspector will have done in reviewing the application as a whole. So conditions shouldn't be there to provide or require a further assessment or more detailed review of something. That's what the application consideration's for.
Further then, in his assessment, do you think that he has taken account of the fact that as a valued landscape, it has received the protection and enhancement that we would expect?
Well, by the fact that he allowed the appeal and approved it, I'd say yes. And it is, obviously we attached the appeal decision in the appendix. I couldn't tell you word for word what he said, but the fact that the appeal was approved, or allowed, shall we say, suggests that there's no doubt in his assessment that there's harm. You know, that if you read it, it's damning in places on certain aspects. They then get to the planning balance and they don't feel that the harm outweighs the benefits. That's essentially what it comes down to. And nowhere in their assessment do they say that there isn't harm. That would be the wrong thing to say. It is clear in there that they've identified harm, but on the balance and on the planning balance and conclusion at the end, they have tilted, the balance in favour.
Thank you. Councillor Wheeler, do you have another question?
Yes, I was just digging a little bit deeper on that. I think Councillor Horwood was actually suggesting that the local condition seemed to think that wasn't taken into consideration. Now, if you're saying it was, then I've got no further...
I think we're getting into the debate area here. I think Ben's answered the question fairly succinctly, and I would hope that people can understand the situation.
Was it taken into consideration by them?
I can't answer for the inspector. You'd have to read the appeal decision, which was attached as an appendix. I cannot tell you what thought process went through the appeal inspector's mind. If he didn't consider it, he was wrong not to. You know, but we are in the situation when we are, where there's an extant planning permission. So I know I keep repeating that, but there's not a lot we can do about it. The local authority did actually, refuse the original scheme. It's not gone that way. So we are, unfortunately, where we are.
Right. I don't see any other questions coming forward. We'll go into debate now. So any member? The questions have all been answered and you're all happy, are you? All right. Well, you're all happy with where we're at. If there's no debate, then I don't think there's anything for Ben to come back on. So we'll use the electronic voting system as normal. So all those in favour of the scheme, please show. Those against, show. So the voting system shows that there are 10 people for the application for approval, 1 against. So that has been carried. Oh, sorry, isn't it? I can't read my thing here. No, there's none against, 1 abstention. 10 for, none against, 1 abstention. So that is carried. Thank you. We're now going on to the second application, and I'll ask Lucy to get to the rostrum so that she can prepare for it. While she's doing that, I would just like to say something before we start this part of the meeting. And I'd like to say that before we go further, I appreciate the concern that this application is having on the community. I appreciate also that the civic society have asked people to be respectful and not to cause any disturbance by heckling. I am thankful for that. I take protests as an unalienable right enshrined in our democracy and would defend that totally. However, I'm equally of the opinion that threatening people to take a certain view is unacceptable, and I am perturbed that there has been some indication that such threats have been put out on social media to put pressure on planning members. We as a committee have a responsibility to listen to all parties, including our respected planning officers. We will, without doubt, take account of all views and deal with the application based on the information and due regard to the planning process. Thank you for that. I'll ask Lucy to introduce it for us, please.
Thank you, Chair. This is an outline planning application for the erection of 4 self-custom-built dwellings on land on the south side of Glenful Way. The means of access is to be determined in detail at outline stage, with all other matters reserved for future consideration. This application has been called in at the request of Councillor Day, and the reasons given are the harmful impact on the AONB, or Cotswold National Landscape as it's now known, and the level of local interest in this application. So the site location, it's within Charlton Kings. It's on the edge of the settlement boundary, just outside the principal urban area, surrounded by open fields on 2 sides, and it's adjacent to residential properties and Glenfall Primary School. And the blue line there indicates land within the applicant's ownership to the southeast. sort of site aerial of the site, with the site outlined in red, just to give a little bit more perspective.
More clear, we can't hear what she's saying at the back of the hall.
Some site photographs. This is the view of the site looking from Glenfall Way, and the view of the scarp in the background. And this is a view of the site from the public footpath that runs alongside the site. The proposed indicative site layout plan clearly shows the 4 houses in the northwest area of the site and the area of retained open space with the footpath running through it and the SUDS features and enhanced landscaping and boundary treatment. And this is a similar site layout plan, and the blue shaded area indicates the retained view of the scarp from Glenfall Way and Ryworth Road, and shows again the footpath running through the site and the landscaping and enhancements. A set of parameter plans have been submitted. They cover land use. That's the top left-hand diagram. Obviously, the orange area is the built-up area, and the green is the retained open space landscaping. And the building heights parameter plan is the top right. The orange is 2-storey, and the blue is single-storey. And the access and movement plan to the bottom there, showing the main access in and the public footpath links. These are indicative elevations of each plot, showing sort of a range of materials, pitch roof, traditional forms. That's plot 1, that's the largest of the 4 plots. And that plot fronts Glenfall Way. Plot 2, similar. Plot 3. And plot 4 is the single-storey building furthest into the site. I won't show all the indicative floor plans, but this is plot 1, the largest of the plots. Just gives an idea of layout and how the footprint works on each site. And this is plot 4, the single-storey. And some street view long elevations of the site. The top elevation is looking from the public footpath across the site, and the bottom elevation drawing is the reverse. And some street view perspectives. The top diagram illustrates the site as you're coming up from Ryworth Road, looking across the road. Bottom left is from Glenfall Way, and bottom right is looking at it from the main access. They're not particularly clear, but they're nonetheless helpful. The applicant has provided a set of plot passports or design code for each plot, and these set out the floor area, the building footprint, internal floor area, the roof forms, storey heights, and the materials palette, boundary treatments, etc., etc. I've reproduced for the design code for plot 1, just to make it a bit clearer for you. But as you can see there, it covers the site area, internal floor space, number of garages, parking spaces, the materials palette, so it would be composite timber, natural stone, slate roofs, aluminium windows, and sets out the various boundary treatments, ancillary building requirements, and roof forms and garaging. So the key planning matters for this application are the principle of new housing development outside the principal urban area, and the conflict with policy SD10 of the JCS, and consideration of paragraph 11D of the NPPF and section 5 of the NPPF. The impact on the scenic and landscape qualities of the Cotswold National Landscape, policies SD6 and SD7 of the JCS, and section 15 of the MPPF. An assessment of the indicative architectural design and layout, although it's an outline planning application, nonetheless, we have considered the indicative layouts and designs. Ecology, protected species and biodiversity net gain. Traffic and highway safety, and impact on the amenity of neighbouring land users. Just turning to those in turn. As members will have seen on the site visit, the application site is located adjacent to the settlement boundary and therefore just outside the principal urban area. Policy 10 of the JCS does not support new housing development outside of the principal urban area, other than in certain circumstances, none of which apply in this case. Therefore, the construction of the 4 new dwellings on this site would be in conflict with SD7. The application site is also located in the Cotswold National Landscape, formerly known as the OMB. But that said, there is no local or national planning policy or guidance that precludes new housing development within a national landscape. However, the application has been considered carefully within the context of JCS policy SD7 and MPPF guidance, which both seek to prevent inappropriate and harmful development within the Cotswold National Landscape, alongside the duty placed on local authorities to further the purpose of conserving and enhancing the scenic and landscape qualities of national landscapes. The Council's landscape architect was involved at pre-application stage and has undertaken a careful assessment of the proposals and the extent to which previous concerns have been addressed. Whilst the proposals would result in harm to this part of the Cotswold National Landscape, and there would be a change in the rural character of this site, the landscape architect concludes that the visual and landscape impacts of the proposals are at the lower end of the effect scale. They will diminish over time and are judged to be minor, adverse and permanent. The proposals address the concerns raised at pre-application stage, notably the critical views of the escarpment from Ryworth Road across the site would be maintained. This is achieved by the linear layout in the northwest section of the site and the reduction in height of buildings southwards. The openness and rural character and the green gap between this part of Charlton Kings and Ham would also be maintained. And essentially, the development would read as a small residential extension of the urban fringe. 2/3 of the site would provide public open space and recreational opportunities for the local community, including a new permissive footpath that would connect to the adjacent public right-of-way and the wider Cotswold National Footpath Network. The applicant has agreed to enter into a Section 106 obligation to secure the retention of this public open space and permissive footpath link in perpetuity, thereby also removing the potential for the remainder of the site to come forward for new housing development in the future. Turning to ecology matters and biodiversity net gain, the mandatory 10% biodiversity net gain, specifically in relation to habitat units, cannot be achieved on-site. This is primarily due to the retained grassland within the site being used as public open space, which will need to be managed and maintained in a different way to the initially proposed lowland grassland. As such, there would need to be a small off-site offsetting purchase of habitat units by a recognised biodiversity net gain provider. And the revised draft heads of terms confirms the applicant's commitment to purchase the required 1.9 units. The Council's ecologist considers the biodiversity gain plan and off-site offsetting proposals to achieve the 10% gain acceptable, and has subsequently confirmed that there are no further requirements prior to the determination of this application. Members have also been made aware of the protected species on site and the applicant's mitigation strategy. This has also been approved by the Council's ecologist. Updated protected species surveys, a biodiversity net gain plan and habitat management and monitoring plan will be required as necessary at reserve matter stage and/or via Section 106 obligations. There are no significant neighbour amenity concerns, and the Highway Authority has raised no objection, subject to the approval of required visibility displays for the proposed vehicular access. Although an outline application, as I've just shown you, a set of detailed indicative layout, elevation and floor plan drawings have been submitted. The indicative architectural design approach is considered appropriate for the site context and is reflected in the plot passports. Therefore, any reserved matters proposals would need to be in substantial accordance with both the parameter plans and plot passports and secured through planning conditions. This would ensure the delivery of a scheme that is appropriate in design scale and appearance for this more sensitive location, whilst allowing some homeowner flexibility for the self-build plots. Members may also recall the recent appeal for 4 dwellings on land just east of the application site facing Glenfall Way. Although the appeal was dismissed, the officer report outlines the inspector's conclusions and highlights the differences between the 2 sites and their respective proposals. These differences relate to location, character, size, the impact on views of the escarpment and the resulting adverse effects on the Cotswold National Landscape. And of course, each application should always be considered on its individual merits. Whilst the appeal decision is a material consideration of this application, it does not set a precedent. To sum up, the proposals are in conflict with the housing policies of the development plan. However, the council does not currently have a 5-year supply of deliverable housing land. Therefore, in accordance with paragraph 11D of the NPPF and having undertaken a careful assessment of the development's impact on the Cotswold National Landscape, reasons have been identified in this case to justify the granting of outline planning permission. In that assessment, offers fully acknowledge that the site is located within the Cotswold National Landscape, and the character of this field parcel would undoubtedly change as a result of the proposed development. The council's landscape architect has identified adverse landscape and visual impacts, but these are considered to be at the lower end of the effect scale and will diminish over time. The landscape architect also identifies the benefits of the proposals from a landscape perspective and some enhancement to the Cotswold National Landscape. The proposals are therefore considered to protect the overall scenic and landscape qualities of this part of the Cotswold National Landscape and the purpose for which it was designated. As such, there are no strong reasons to refuse the application by virtue of the proposal's location within the national landscape. There are other clear benefits associated with the proposals, and these include the provision of 4 new dwellings that contribute positively to the council's supply of housing sites, and this must carry substantial weight in the overall planning balance. The scheme would also deliver 4 self-build plots, and again, this contributes positively in meeting demand on the council's self-build register. 2/3 of the site would provide an area of public open space, including an alternative and safer footpath link that would connect with the wider Cotswold National Landscape footpath network. The open space and footpath will be retained in perpetuity and would provide recreational opportunities for the local community. The adverse impacts of the proposals are not therefore considered to significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits of the proposals, and the recommendation is to grant outline planning permission, subject to the conditions set out in the update officer report and the applicant entering into a Section 106 agreement. And those obligations would include the retention of public open space and the new footpath link in perpetuity, the implementation and future management of approved biodiversity net gain, future management of public open spaces, the delivery of self-custom build housing, and mitigation for recreational pressure on the Beechwood Special Area of Conservation. I won't run through all the 30+ conditions, but they are set out in the update report. There is just one typo in the conclusion of the officer report. Just want to bring that to members' attention. At paragraph 7.3, it should say strong reasons for refusal, not clear reasons for refusal, just to avoid any doubt on that point. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Lucy. So we now come to our speakers, and I will just remind you briefly again that you have 5 minutes only, and I will remind you 30 seconds before you come to the end of them. I'd like to ask Dr. Ranulph Crook as the objector to address the committee. Thank you very much.
I object to this planning application in any form because the site lies in a designated national landscape. This carries statutory protection, and the proposal conflicts with national policy, case law, and previous appeals for this very site and the same previous arguments. There are also serious and material omissions that make this application invalid and raise significant concerns about the due diligence. Firstly, the biodiversity net gain calculations, the BNG, are flawed. The applicant proposes to enhance and replace the southwestern boundary hedgerow with a native one instead of the non-native laurel to give a 16% increase. This southwestern boundary, however, is not within the red line and belongs to me and my neighbours. The BNG calculations cannot include habitats outside of the red line without agreement or legal control, so the BNG 16% increase calculation is invalid. No approach or discussion has been made by the applicant. To replace this hedgerow, therefore, without permission would not be lawful. Secondly, the plans are flawed as the development is situated right over our private water supply pipes. There is no acknowledgement of this, no lawful diversion strategy, and no right of access. And again, there's been no approach by the applicant or discussion. Thirdly, the revised street perspective views rely on a disingenuously planted tree in front of the houses to obscure the loss of the key view down from Ryworth Road onto the escarpment. The plans reduce this open view by approximately 50% from the top of Ryworth Road, and the landscape architect reported the visual impact could cause a major to moderate material change in places. A pre-planning requirement was to maintain this very view. The obstruction, whether a tree or house, also conflicts with the Highway Agency's visibility requirements of a 2.4 metre by 43 splay and no obstructions above 60 centimetres in either direction from the access point. Furthermore, the hedgerow to the right of the access road is largely owned by me and my neighbours, meaning this condition can't lawfully be met without our permission. Fourthly, there is no contaminated land assessment. The southern part of the field was a septic soakaway for our properties for years. The system failed repeatedly, requiring new soakaways to be dug repeatedly in that area. And when sewage overflowed into our neighbours' gardens, this was abandoned and we were connected to the mains. This is both therefore a contamination risk for the proposed public open space and a drainage risk for the infiltration-based drainage system. A phase 1 assessment must be conducted. This otherwise contravenes the NPPF 196, which requires that a site is suitable for its proposed use, taking into account of ground conditions and any risks arising from contamination. Fifth, the council's ecologists confirmed badger sets will be impacted by the development and require closure or partial closure. Excluding badgers from a set requires a licence and landowner agreement. The set extends into our land. Yet again, we have had no approach by either the council or the applicant for our approval and would not agree to these terms. The updated report does give an alternative to bury a fence along our boundary line instead. This requires deep excavation along our boundary. Under common law trespass, the Party Wall Act, Natural England's licensing conditions, no such works can lawfully be carried out without the adjoining landowner's written consent. There are no exceptional circumstances that justify harm to this natural landscape and AONB. The previous appeal inspector made it clear that this very same fringe location is vulnerable to incremental erosion and that development here would cause demonstrable harm to natural beauty. That assessment still applies. NPPF 189 states that great weight must be given to conserving and enhancing landscape and scenic beauty in national landscapes, which have the highest level of protection. Nothing in that proposal meets this test, nor has anything changed since the last appeal. The inspector concluded that residential development here would cause, and I quote, demonstrable harm to the quality of the natural beauty of the landscape. Even the application itself
30 seconds.
Provides direct evidence of harm and justified grounds of refusal. The updated BNG calculations suggest a loss of nearly 10% of habitat, Buying off-site units absolutely does not compensate for landscape loss in a nationally protected area and does nothing to conserve and enhance the landscape. For these reasons, the application is incomplete, technically unsound, and contrary to national policy. In both law and planning policy, it should be refused. Thank you.
Thank you. You were dead on time. I'd now like to ask Ben Reid, as the applicant's representative, to come forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This is a planning application for self-built dwellings. From the outset, in preparing the proposals, there have been a number of core considerations largely reflected in the officer's report, notably the landscape context of the site and its location with the AONB, now National Landscape, changes to planning policy over recent years, recognising the planning history and what has changed since that time, the delivery of self-built accommodation and the statutory requirements to do so. Planning officer talked about housing supply, but there's also a duty on self-build specifically, and the opportunity to deliver finality for this site. We recognise that there have been previous planning applications here, but for very different proposals. Through a comprehensive approach, there are opportunities to enhance nature conservation and public access within the site. This is not salami slicing, as has been claimed. It is the opposite. Most of the site will be managed for ecology with community access, sterilising potential future development in this area. These considerations sat alongside detailed and early pre-application engagement with officers, including your landscape architect. The officer report is comprehensive, recommending the proposals be granted planning permission, reflecting the high quality of the proposals that minimise impact and maximise benefit. To highlight some of the key issues for determination, in the context of landscape, officers, including the Council's landscape architect, recognise that the design and layout minimise impacts on the AONB, but also recognise that the proposal will bring some enhancement to it. Through the wider natural meadow proposals, existing views are maintained and new views created from within the site by providing the opportunity of public access. These measures are to be secured by legal agreement. It is noted that the AONB board were consulted on this application and they declined to comment. Public access through a new permissive path, also secured by legal agreement, will enable access to the meadow, which occupies 74% of the entire site, and is an alternative to using the existing track, which is currently shared with a skip lorries serving the recycling business adjacent, safer and much more attractive. Design, a high quality design which has been subject to early pre-app engagement and support from the architects panel. A sustainable location, providing opportunity to access local services and facilities. A materially different planning policy environment to the planning history, not only addressing technical constraints previously raised, but considering the proposal in the context of revised national policy, a presumption in favour of development and applying a tilted balance, and also the significant shortfall in housing generally, but also self-build accommodation, which comes with statutory force. Highly sustainable dwellings, utilising renewable energy and high-quality fabric and energy efficiency. An acceptable relationship with the surrounding development, also establishing a permanent gap on the settlement edge, preventing future development and delivering finality, removing the ability to salami slice. No concerns have been raised from any of the technical officers, which would direct that this is even a fine balance in decision-making terms. These matters have led your officers to the conclusion that any impact of development is at the lower end of the scale. They do not significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits, which have been identified, and a substantial weight identified in favour of the proposals. The offer proposed by the application, the planning obligations to be secured and the accompanying planning conditions set out the applicant's commitment to deliver high quality development which can be integrated locally and benefit the wider community. Thank you for your time, and I hope you give this application a consideration. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well within your time. And now, could I ask Councillor Day to come forward, please?
This land is not suitable for development. The words of Councillor Baker, a highly experienced and respected former member of this committee, recorded in the minutes of the meeting which refused, against officers' recommendation, a previous application on this field, also for 4 houses with landscaping and public open space. The inspector who dismissed the 2008 appeal to build on this site said, "I do not consider that the site can be considered suitable for housing, despite the council having a housing land supply shortfall at the time." Since then, planning rules over the AONB have been further tightened by Section 245 of the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act 2023, the LURA, which requires the council to seek to further the purpose of conserving and enhancing the natural beauty of the AONB. The inspector who dismissed the recent appeal on the neighbouring field determined that the LURA imposes a more rigorous requirement than SD7. This application in no way conserves or enhances the AONB. Views from Glenfell Way will be materially affected by the housing, which will be clearly visible, not least because highways require that vegetation is kept at a low height to give vehicles clear visibility when leaving the site. The house designs are as hideous as they are huge, incorporating what look like cladded porta cabins, and in no way enhance the AONB. The Porsche sports cars in the drawings indicate the pricing. There are issues with the landscape architect report. Under areas of concern, the architect says, "I was under the impression that the development would be built out by a single developer. The self-build brings in an element of risk in terms of changed arrangements, where they are critical in terms of the appearance of the scheme." The developer was clear in their neighbourhood consultation that they intend to sell the plots with outline planning permission attached, and it will be the responsibility of the buyers to bring forward detailed designs under a reserved matters application. The architect says in relation to composite wood cladding, "I am unfamiliar with the ageing process of composite wood and question whether it would mature and silver down to better assimilate into the local landscape." The application is well understood by local residents. More than 100 objections have been received to date and no expressions of support despite the applicant's neighbourhood consultation. Among the many valid reasons for objecting are that it conflicts with paragraph 187A of the MPPF, as it does not protect or enhance the landscape character of the site. Paragraph 189 of the MPPF, which says great weight should be given to conserving and enhancing landscape and scenic beauty, and that the conservation and enhancement of wildlife is an important consideration. As I said earlier, it conflicts with Section 245 of the LURA and SD7. It also conflicts with the Cotswold Management Plan. The updated officer's report shows, after repeated challenge from the CBC ecologist, there will be a 9.12% habitat loss. This is a clear admission that the AONB will be neither conserved nor enhanced. Members should note that the small off-site BNG requirement described in the previous version of the officer's report was based on a 2.53% loss, a figure that had been superseded at the time. An over 9% loss is not small. The UK is one of the most nature-depleted countries in the world, and we cannot afford to lose more of our precious protected habitats. It has been confirmed that the badger set will be affected, at a minimum by excavation and use of a buried chain link fence, In what way does that conserve and enhance wildlife?
30 seconds.
The badgers are living happily in a highly protected landscape. This application is about a rapacious developer who is happy to build over their home to maximise their profits, and this application must be refused. Thank you.
Please, I know you're very concerned about this, but extended applause does not help the process. I now ask Councillor Dr Pemberton to come forward, please.
Thank you, Chair. There have, as has already been said, over 100 objections to this application, many of them expressing concern about the loss of this important wildlife habitat. It's part of the Cotswolds national landscape. As at least one resident has pointed out, granting permission for development in this location represents the thin end of a wedge. It does set a precedent. If we grant permission to build on one part of the Cotswold national landscape, then how can we justify refusing the next application and the next? We already leave so little room for nature in this country. Surely we have a responsibility to protect what little remains. There are many barriers in place that provide justification to refuse this application. For some reason, these all seem to be being ignored. Once our areas of natural habitat are gone, we, as a species, have an extremely poor record of replacing it. I'd like to remind the committee of the Council's own draft nature recovery supplementary planning document, which is out for consultation. The following points seem particularly pertinent. 1.5. Cheltenham Borough Council believes that it's vital that we protect, enhance and grow biodiversity throughout our urban and rural environments. 1.6. This is a UK Biodiversity Action Plan priority habitat, which is important for biodiversity and maintaining the ecological character of Cheltenham. 1.14. Cheltenham Borough Council declared a climate emergency in July 2019. It goes on to say that research shows that a minimum of 10% biodiversity net gain is required to prevent biodiversity degradation. This is not the case here. As an example of the wildlife that would be adversely affected by this development, there is a badger set close to the area the developer has applied to build over. The badgers also have a right to a home, every bit as much as we do. Yet, if it suits us, we'll move them. Like the rest of the wildlife in our area, we move them over a bit. We squeeze them into ever smaller areas until that area is no longer adequate to sustain them. Then we wonder what happened, why we have no wildlife, why there are no birds, no bees, why certain species like the slugs in your garden get out of control. I'd like to remind members, badgers are the UK's last remaining native large carnivore. Badgers and their sets are protected by the Protection of Badgers Act 1992. This law strictly prohibits any malicious or negligent act which disturbs badgers or their homes. Development projects can result in the loss of badger foraging areas, so even if we move them to a new home, they may not have enough area to forage. Badgers are ecosystem engineers, and the loss of viable habitat for badgers has wide-reaching consequences for other native plants and animals. And finally, recently acquired, the Campaign for the Protection of Rural England has also finally lodged a strong objection to the application due to the site of the proposed development being in the Cotswold National Landscape, which should have the greatest degree of protection afforded by national guidance and local policy. I would like to draw the committee's attention to that objection. They reference specifically National Policy Planning Framework Section 15, in particular paragraphs 187 and 189. Joint Core Strategy Policy SD7, which is local as well. The recently adopted Cotswold National Landscape Management Plan, which emphasises the importance of higher tier guidance and policy. The Campaign for the Protection of Rural England's view is that the adverse effects of the proposed development outweigh any benefits, that the application is contrary to policy and is not supported by relevant material considerations. For all these reasons and many more, I would request that the committee refuse this planning permission. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Now I will open this up to members' questions. Any member? Councillor Wheeler caught my eye first.
Yes, two questions. Firstly, the footpath. You talked about a permitted footpath, albeit in perpetuity. That doesn't hold a great deal of weight, as in the future, that could be closed relatively easily. Would it not be better if this application was to go through, that became an amendment to the definitive map rather than a permitted footway, or perhaps even divert the current footpath, which is not really fit for purpose as a footpath, in that it's being used as access to residents living along that footpath to drive on. And if it is only a footpath, it's not really suitable. So either diverting the footpath or an amendment to the definitive map to make that a much stronger way of making that a permanent footpath. It could only then be closed or stopped up by the Office of the Deputy Prime Minister with a very good reason. And my other brief question is, unless I've missed it, is there any comment from the Cotswold Conservation Board?
In answer to your first question, the footpath diversion is not part of the planning application proposal, so that's not been considered. The footpath link is an alternative route through. It would provide a safer, more accessible route through to avoid using the track used by commercial vehicles. It would be a mown path, not a hard surface track. It would be a mown path through the site. Footpath diversion would require a process and a lengthy process. So that's not been considered. I did consult the County Council Rights of Way officer, and he didn't suggest that. He felt that the proposals didn't affect the existing right of way in any way. So it's not been proposed, therefore not considered.
Yes. Second question.
And the second question, yes, we have had a comment back from the Cotswold Conservation Board. There was no direct response from them. They just referred us to local national planning policy on Cotswold National Landscape.
Can I just bring in the legal officer before I take the next question, please?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that on the footpath issue, before it can go on to the definitive plan, it has to be an established footpath. So you can't just put it onto the definitive plan. It has to be established, and as being explained by the planning officer, there is no plan to have this footpath. It's not part of the planning application.
Thank you for that clarification. Councillor Steinhardt.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Chair. Could I just have some clarification over the biodiversity net gain and the hedgerow mentioned by one of the objectors, who is saying that it's his property, so therefore it cannot be used as part of that gain?
Yeah, the biodiversity gain plan includes some replacement of a non-native laurel hedge along the western boundary of the site, and some replacement hedging throughout on all boundaries. This was brought to my attention a couple of weeks ago, and I have been trying to seek some clarification from the applicant. I think the conclusion is that there is potentially some of that laurel hedge is within the application site and some outside. And where the bases are within the application site, it will be replaced. And there is enhancement of hedgerow throughout the site anyway. The Reserve Matters application will have to include an updated biodiversity net gain plan. So any anomalies will be picked up at that stage.
Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Chair. There's one point that's raised in Councillor Day's speech, which I would appreciate clarification on, and I think would be absolutely critical to the application, which is the matter of precedence with the prior application that was refused appeal. Could the officer please provide clarification on why that was refused and why this is being accepted despite the housing shortfall? I imagine it's probably because of the engagement of paragraph 11D II, but I'd be interested to hear thoughts about why, in this case, the harm wouldn't outweigh the need for the housing when in the previous appeal that was dismissed. Thank you.
Well, I don't have the appeal decision in front of me, and I'd probably have to reread it to give you a very thorough and clear answer on that. But the officer report does discuss that appeal decision, and our landscape architect has also considered both proposals and the appeal dismissal. The appeal site is very different in character. It's far smaller. 5 houses were proposed on that site. The layout of the scheme was frontage development, and the important views of the SCART would have been blocked by that scheme far more so than the current application proposal, which is a larger site, retains the important views. It limits development to one side. It's also on the edge of the settlement boundary and not separated from it. The appeal site is more isolated, and it would have urbanised that gap and closed that gap between Ham and Charlton Kings, whereas the application site doesn't do that to the same extent.
Thank you. I'll bring the legal officer in again.
Yeah, the position on the appeal side is that I think it may have predated the 11D tilted balance analysis. So it may well be that, and when that decision was made, the merits as assessed were just basically development plan and any other material considerations. But now we're in the territory, following government guidance in the National Planning Policy Framework, that we have to look at it in terms of giving it a greater presumption unless the harm is demonstrably and significantly outweighed by the gain, by the benefit of the scheme.
Thank you for that. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair. I've had a quick look. I don't recall if there are any stables near this plot, but actually laurel is poisonous to horses. That's a minor consideration. I'm asking, we always are concerned that if the committee should reject an application and the developer goes to appeal, that we will be spending taxpayers' money in defending that decision. So I'm asking, do you know whether an inspector would be minded to approve more readily because it's self-build versus a developer just building the houses? Because I'm wondering why they've come back with a request for self-build, and if that's the reason that it has more appeal to an inspector.
Thank you, Chair. Well, it's certainly the case that the fact that this is an application for self-build dwellings, that is an aspect that weighs strongly in favour of the development. It remains the case that there is a planning balance to be done, and the pros and cons of the development have to be weighed up in that planning balance. But it is fair to say that there is a duty for the council to have regard to the self-build register and have regard to granting permission for developments which meet the demand on that register. That doesn't mean to say that the committee is obliged to grant permission. It's certainly not. But it is something that carries an elevated level of weight in the balance.
Bring in the officer again.
Just to echo what the planners have said, which is that there is a statutory requirement to have a certain level of self-build, and I think we're falling short of it. In those circumstances, it becomes a material consideration to weigh in the balance, and the inspector would do that. And what weight that inspector would give to that is entirely up to him. But in this case, where we have insufficient self-build on the register, it would be quite a weighty consideration.
Councillor Oliver.
Thanks, Chair. Dr. Cook raised a number of points. Some of them sounded like civil matters rather than planning matters to me. But were there any planning matters that you don't think were addressed within your report?
Could you be a bit more specific? Sorry. As to what those civil versus planning matters might be?
The question of ownership of the hedge and the contaminated land risk from the drainage.
I think I've answered the question about the hedge in terms of the extent to which it might or might not fall within the application site ownership. Drainage, the drainage officer has reviewed the drainage strategy provided at outline stage. The reserve matters details would need to include a detailed surface water SUDS drainage strategy and a foul water drainage strategy. So any issues with the soakaway, which wasn't raised by the drainage officer at this stage, will be picked up at that stage when there's a detailed scheme in front of us.
Thank you. Any other questions before we go into debate? In that case, we'll go straight into debate. Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Chair. This application has been described this evening by the planning officer as an, quote, extension of the urban fringe. That is an extension of Cheltenham into the Cotswold National Landscape, the CNL. To spell out this, the two key points from me that follow from this are, firstly, I note, indeed it was stated this evening, that this building beyond Cheltenham's urban boundary is in conflict with the local joint course strategy, JCS, and also with the NPPF, the national planning framework. And secondly, the impact on the Cotswold National Landscape, the CNL of this development, would be similarly contrary to the joint course strategy, the JCS, and also the NPPF as well. Now, I know these facts have been stated this evening, but they're so important that I'd just like now to underline those two key points. This is against stated strategy, local and national.
Thank you. Councillor Wheeler.
Yes, well, obviously, one of the most important points, there are a lot of very strong reasons why we could or should refuse this application. However, I think I've often been known to, well, I certainly do very much appreciate self-build and the principle of self-build. And I do feel that, like some other countries, we don't have enough self-build in this country. I mean, I can think of places where self-build is the norm, and estates built by large developers is very much the exception to the rule. Unfortunately, we have what we have in this country, but the self-build do offer much more diversity and more interesting buildings. As for this particular site, I do feel that, yes, it is in the AONB, and therefore we have a good reason to refuse it. However, it is right along the very edge. Views out into the AONB are, yes, that there is some effect on it, but I feel that the views, as officers have said, of the AONB are not greatly impaired. So I'm of the opinion that the effects of this development are minimal, and insofar that we do need more houses, even sort of the bigger ones, perhaps it's the smaller ones that we are in greatest need of. I do feel that there is good reason for this development.
Thank you. Councillor Foster.
Can I just say that I think exactly the opposite? It's almost as if the plans are to sneak these houses in where it won't quite be noticed that they're outside the urban area. And then what's to stop another line being sneaked in and another line and them creeping across the landscape? So I have to disagree with what you say. I would prefer to see houses dotted with lots of space between them in valleys where you wouldn't notice them. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
I'm minded that we have to build and that we're under pressure. However, I don't think we should give in on this because of what Councillor Dobie said. I think if we give in on this, there'll be creep and there'll be more building. The other thing that really concerns me is that this is an application where each house could come back and change the design. So we're not really sure what we'll end up with. And also, I think we only have 6 areas of biodiversity left in Cheltenham. We are incredibly short of land. So I'm afraid, Councillor Foster, we're not going to get houses in valleys. There is no land available. And I deeply resent the people who've had planning applications for large schemes and are sitting on them, not doing anything. And I'm really worried, not by this lot. I'm worried about what we're signing up to here and that we shouldn't allow the creep.
Thank you. Councillor Bamford.
So firstly, just to say, I completely get the strong planning case that's been made justifying this development. I think it's possible as a councillor to have a slightly different perspective than where the planning officer is coming from. For instance, I am mindful of the massive local objection to this and the complete lack of support locally. And I will take that into account when I'm voting. Secondly, Councillor Dobie's point, which is actually the strongest from my perspective, for me, AONB, Cotswold Land, Natural Landscape, whatever you call it, that has always been absolutely sacrosanct. To sacrifice that for a tiny contribution towards our housing need, I can't go with that. And I'd also add that we've been under huge pressure as a committee to build as a result of a national target, which is frankly bonkers. Not only do I think it's bonkers for the local target, but I'd even question whether when you take a medium and particularly a longer term view, we actually need all these houses. So, the birth rate is low. There's a whole load of us baby boomers that will soon leave the stage. So I think there's a question there. So forgive me for being negative about that target, and I appreciate that obviously as a group of planners, we must heed it. However, for me, there is a big question mark there. And finally, really, a contribution of 4 towards that impossible to meet target, I just don't feel is going to be materially helpful. Thanks.
I've got, 2 more speakers. Please, we've got to get through this debate. I've got 2 more speakers, Councillor Steinhardt and Councillor Andrews, and I've got 2 more as well. So, Councillor Steinhardt first.
Right, thank you, Chair. I suppose when is harm not harm? I mean, there is harm coming, and I agree with my colleagues totally about a lot of this is contrary to policies. We've talked about the NPPF, we've talked about the JCS policy, we've talked about the Cheltenham Plan and the CNL Management Plan. All of those, all this is all what we are proposing, and I accept the things that the officers said, and they've produced very good arguments, but it's all again contrary to what we stand for, which is actually protecting our environment. So I would quote that the proposal does not conserve or enhance the national beauty of the Cotswold natural landscape. And I rest my case. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Andrews?
Yeah, I'm just like to note that obviously that field in question, I'm presuming is not presently publicly accessible. So there is an argument, and it has been made, that it enhances the environment for those that wander onto that field. That is obviously the case. I find it somewhat ironic that we quote these 4 dwellings as adding to our housing stock, when only just a few hundred yards away we were arguing about holiday lets transferring to residential, and people took the opposite. The planners took the opposite view on that in that respect. Yes, we do need more housing. Obviously, the housing we really need is social, generally, and considerably lower value than the ones that these are going to be multi-million things, I should imagine, if anyone chose to sell them once they built them. I do wonder, though, it's with the lack of any major objections from the likes of Natural England or the highways, whether if this goes to a planning inspector, if we refuse it, it'll be overturned. I also wonder that if we accept it, it may end up under judicial review. So either way, I suspect it might not be the end of the saga here. On balance, I would accept the planning officer's recommendation. In terms of biodiversity, and I do not like this sort of offsetting business. I don't know where exactly they're planning on offsetting. If it's just, oh, we promise not to cut down this bit of forest, that's not gain at all. Obviously, if we do accept it and we have biodiversity net gain, it'll better be within Gloucestershire for certain, and hopefully adding to the Western Forest project. But on balance, I will probably just about go with the planning officers on this, but I'm not particularly happy about it.
Thank you. You mentioned judicial review. I don't think that would happen, and I'll ask the legal officer just to come back on that.
I think it's appropriate at this stage in the debate to actually make a number of points. First and foremost of which is that the consideration about how this could be encroaching in terms of granting this and then there's going to be copycat applications is not a material consideration. You have to look at this application on its own merits and not forecast into the future and see that there might be ramifications, which may or may not happen, but you're speculating then. On the thing about, well, there's a strong objection from locals, therefore that's a material consideration. No, it's not. You can't weigh that in the balance. It's something which is there, and it's pretty obvious in this chambers that it is there, but it should not be allowed to interfere with your decision-making process. That is absolutely vital. To even mention that, I think is perhaps not the way to go. Finally, judicial review only comes into effect if your decision is so unreasonable that you have taken, a totally unreasonable decision. What's going to happen here is that if the decision is to refuse, then there is an appeal. There's an appeal. But if the decision is to grant, then there may well be judicial review, but the criteria for that is very strict.
Sorry, Councillor Bamford, did you? I've still got other
I've just been openly criticised there, and I would like to come back on that, please.
Well, I think it's a comment that was as a result of your
We have an extensive
comments.
process of consultation. Are we just to ignore all of that? I don't. It doesn't make any sense, that comment to me. I don't.
Could I explain to the council that I'm not criticising him in the very least, not criticising him at all. I'm just simply advising him that that is not a material consideration. And of course, in the hustle and bustle of decision making and planning committee, a lot of things are going to be said naturally, but that's not a criticism of you at all.
Thank you. We'll move on then to Councillor Oliver.
Thanks, Chair. Look, I'm really conflicted here. I've lived in Cheltenham all my life. I used to walk along Glenfall as a boy before the estate was there. I came onto the planning committee to try and enhance Cheltenham and preserve all the local green spaces we've got. But as a planning committee member, I've got to work by planning rules. And this thing called the tilted planning balance is like having your one hand tied behind your back. And to a certain extent, it affects every decision we make. So do I think that if we refused this, we would not be appealed against and not lose it? No, in honesty, I don't. So that would cost the people of Cheltenham money. My job is to try and look after the benefits, the interests of people of Cheltenham. And for that reason, I'm going to have to support the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I want to extend my thanks as Vice Chair to the committee for their honesty and bravery in their opinions, regardless of the discussion. And in consequence of the discussion, I think it's clearly a very controversial and well-held application that a lot of people find to be egregious and a lot of people find to be in accordance with legislation. I think it's an unfortunate case where planning law does not seem to abide by common sense. And I think it's a clear example where we are being pressured, as Councillor Oliver said, into accepting a tilted balance. As a result, we're being strangleholded into something that is contrary to our joint core strategy, but also is contrary to what we would believe is right for Cheltenham and right for our land. I think it's a real shame because, as Councillor Oliver notes, we would probably get punished at appeal for it. And while appeal isn't necessarily a material planning consideration, it does factor into the decision-making that we take. And it's unfortunate because I don't know where to stand on this application. On the one hand, there's there is clearly legal belief that this is correct, but on the other hand, this is immoral. And I honestly, we can't weigh on immoral. We can't weigh in on morality. And I just want to go on record to say that this is a clear example of where the government is out of step with the people. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I'll come to you in a second, Councillor Foster. But we are not being forced into anything. We are looking at planning laws, planning rules. You have had a definitive response from our officers about what we are here to look at. In an ideal world, we wouldn't build on anywhere because it's going to affect somebody or other as a result of any build. And you know that from your planning days that we get objections to every planning application we get because somebody doesn't like what they're going to be faced with. That's not a reason for opposing or rejecting a planning application. You've had some very good advice from our legal officer. You've had a thorough report from our officers about the tilted balance. And yes, in an ideal world, I'd love to see a whole area of Cheltenham greened and beautified by trees and whatever. But this planning application lies on the basis that it is a responsible way of dealing with the land we've got in our control. And we have to take a planning view on these issues. It isn't I accept you think it's a moral attitude, Councillor Allen, but it isn't. It's a practical thing we have to deal with. And governments make all kinds of decisions over the years, which some of us disagree with totally, but we have to live with them. And this is, I think, in an ideal world, I would say that, you know, I would prefer not to have seen this scheme, but it is a proper planning scheme put forward to us. And I take the officer's advice on this particular view, and I will be voting for the scheme. Councillor Foster.
I just want to clarify something. Sorry, I'm just slightly confused. He mentioned the risk of going to appeal. Can the legal expert clarify whether the risk of going to appeal is actually a material consideration that we ought to be thinking about?
In itself, the risk of appeal, in itself, the risk of appeal is not a material consideration. But if you are dwelling in that respect, you're entertaining the possibility, then necessarily it must be inferred from that you feel the grounds for refusing it would bring that into action, would enact that. So I would be very careful. It's a two-edged sword there. The risk is there. Doesn't mean it's a material consideration, but it does mean that in your mind you're entertaining the possibility that the decision should legally be in a particular direction.
Thank you. Councillor Allen, do you want to come back?
Yes, sorry, thank you, Chair. As a right of reply to your statement, I think, to be honest, we're coming from the same perspective, from the same place with just different perspectives on this. I think we both acknowledge that this is, planning-wise, a thorough report, and planning-wise, it's in accordance with planning law. I think just my perspective is that it's a shame that it is in accordance, and we can't necessarily vote because of any moral considerations. I'm just making that point very clear that we have to vote on planning law. We can't vote on our hearts. We have to vote on what's on the paper. I do raise appeal, and again, I did stress that it's not a material consideration appeal, but again, as legal expert has advised, it is something that does come into the forefront of our minds when we make these decisions. So,
thank you. I do appreciate that some of our decisions do get quite emotional from both sides of the argument, so I accept that. Councillor Wheeler?
Yes, I should have said this earlier. My ward is on the west of Cheltenham, where we are building well in excess of 4,000 homes, plus offices for, I don't know how many thousands it is, and the house I actually live in was once in the middle of an orchard. Here we are looking at 4 houses in, yes, a beautiful area. I think when you put the one against the other, yes, I would like to see all of those houses on the west of, all of the fields on the west of Cheltenham to remain green. But I know we need houses, we need employment land, and therefore I'm prepared to sacrifice all of that for the homes and the workspaces. Again, here we are talking something very small, just 4 houses, not 4,000, in a very small area. And I think the two don't even compare. So I will be voting in favour of the officer's recommendation.
Okay. I just want to raise something else. Councillor Clark, I think, said that there was an issue about the self-bill, that they could be changed substantially. I think that was the thought. If once they've been approved, I think the officer would say that there is not, that would not happen.
Yeah, I was going to come back on that point and one other issue that you raised. The applicant has provided 4 plot passports design codes, and they are quite rigid, and that will inform the reserve matters proposals in terms, and so adequate control over the future design. So they are quite similar in terms of the materials palette and the roof forms. There's a coherence between all 4. But it still would allow some flexibility in terms of internal layout and perhaps some minor tweaks to footprint and other aspects. But obviously the height and the floor area is fixed. So there will be, in this particular case, there will be minimal changes to what you see in those indicative elevations. And the other issue that you mentioned was creep. As set out, the applicant has agreed to enter into a Section 106 obligation to retain the remainder of the site, that's 2/3 of the site, as the open space with the footpath. So that would effectively sterilise the land for future development. So any concerns about creep within the application site is extremely unlikely.
Thank you for that. I think we've had a really good debate. Councillor Foster, did you want to come back on something? Please use your mic.
So sorry. I just wanted to back up what Councillor Bamford said. We've got a balancing act here. We're in an insect crisis. We need this land. And 4 dwellings is a drop in the ocean against our housing need. I just can't see that it outweighs the harm that is going to be done by the development to this site. Personally, I don't feel it outweighs it at all.
Thank you. In which case you will make your choice in a moment. I think we've, as I say, I think we've had a really good debate. I think we've listened to all the views. I think the time is now come to make a decision on it. And but before I do, I would just like to ask the officer if you have any other comments that you'd like to raise before I take the vote.
There's only one other point, more of a procedural point. If the resolution is to grant outline planning permission, we would need to add one further condition in relation to a waste minimisation statement due to a late representation from the County Council. And that could be agreed through Chair and Vice Chair, the wording of that condition.
So an additional...
One additional condition.
Condition, okay. Well, members, you've heard the views of everybody. We will go to the vote now. So it is to permit subject to 106 obligation with the as the extra condition, and if you would accept that, then it would be on the basis that the Vice Chair and the Chair would decide on the wordings of that condition. So I'd ask you to vote for or against. So I think that's everybody. The for is 5, against is 6. Thank you, please. Thank you. So that is refused, and we will take that as the...
Asking reasons for refusal.
Oh, yes, yeah, sorry, yes. Sorry, we haven't actually finished because as we have refused against a permission, a recommendation for permission, we do have to have... Excuse me, sorry, could you be quiet in the gallery? We haven't finished our debate here yet. Thank you. Please, can I ask you to be quiet? We now have to seek a reason for refusal. So would somebody like, particularly of the 6 who refused it, would somebody like to put forward a reason for refusal? You've refused it, so you must have reasons for putting that refusal forward. We need to clarify that so that we can have the vote accepted.
Well, surely.
Councillor Foster.
Can we say that we don't accept the balance? That it... Sorry.
Reliance upon the development plan, you have to give specific policies you're relying upon in coming to your conclusion that even in circumstances of the tilted balance, you're according certain policies great weight, and that the harm caused would be demonstrably and significantly outweighed by any benefit. So you have to rely upon policies. Now, biodiversity was mentioned, other policies were mentioned. You have to rely on those in order to support your decision. I can't tell you which ones to rely upon.
I haven't got them on my screen, but I think it's SD10 of the Joint Core Strategy and paragraph 11D of the National Planning Policy Framework. And probably some others, yes. I'm sorry to make notes of them all.
Councillor Dobie, are you wanting to add to that?
I think early on in the debate, when the presentation was being made, the points were made about 2 particular paragraphs in the Joint Core Strategy, 2 particular paragraphs in the National Planning Framework. But the general point is that what's happening here is that the boundaries of Cheltenham are being extended into the what used to be called the Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty, the Cotswold National Landscape, and that is of such precious land that it deserves to go to appeal, just as the other applications have gone to appeal as well.
But we need to put that into planning terms. What are the reasons in planning rules and terms that have decided you to refuse the application? You haven't supplied any particular reasons.
That's the essence of it.
Thank you, Chair. Just to make the point that obviously, as we don't have a 5-year housing land supply, development needs to be approved, and in particular where the policies that are most important for determining the application are out of date. So in this particular case, members need to be sure or clear that there's a strong reason for refusing the application, or whether there's any adverse impacts of granting would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. So to put that a different way, we need to understand which policies, well, firstly, what the strong reason is, and secondly, what the policies are that support that reason.
Just further, members, the policies are outlined in the report, various policies, the core strategy and development plan. You need to identify which of those policies by chapter and verse you're relying upon in coming to your conclusion that effectively the tilted balance is not swayed you, and that on a balance of probabilities or presumption in favour of development has been displaced. Something has been mentioned along the lines of the development would be on the fringes of a settlement. Something along those lines, I think, was the gist of an area of outstanding national beauty. Something along those lines is going to have to be delivered to support this decision.
Councillor Allen?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, if I may assist as Vice Chair, would there be any consideration for SD7 in an SD10 in response to paragraph 11DII? Because I think it might be that paragraph 11DII overrules SD10 and SD7, but I would appreciate legal and officer advice on this.
If those are the policies you're identifying, then you are saying effectively that those policies overcome the tilted balance and that paragraph 11 of the National Planning Policy Framework. If that's what you're saying, then that could be given as reasons for refusal. Unless there are some other policies which you may be relying upon, but I can't give those to you. It's not my job to do that.
Councillor Dobie?
I hope this is helpful. And then the Council for the Protection of Rural England says, we consider the proposed development is contrary to policy and guidance at all levels. NPPF section 15, in particular paragraphs 187 and 189, and it also goes on to talk about JCS policy as well. You've got this documentation, and there's a specific line in there that you could use.
Thank you.
Do you want me to read it again? And it also doesn't conform with the Cheltenham Plan as well, which is another factor in there. It's in the CPRE Gloucestershire objection. That's what I'm quoting from. So if you're looking for specifics, it's there. It's right at the beginning of it. Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, SD6, which is landscape, and SD7, which is the Cotswold AONB, or policies which seek to sort of preserve and enhance the landscape within those areas. If the committee of the view that the application is contrary to those policies, yes, that's a perfectly legitimate reason for refusal.
Okay. So are we happy to go with SD 6 and 7 as reasons for refusal?
Yeah, section 15, in particular paragraphs 187 and 189, and JCS policy SD7.
Chair and Vice.
Yeah.
Sorry. Are you happy to leave the final wording to the Chair and Vice Chair to resolve? We will put forward the refusals based on what you've put forward today. Okay, all those in favour, just show. I think that's carried. Thank you. Okay. The appeals update, which you've noted, item 7, hopefully. There are no other items which I consider urgent and require a decision, so I close the meeting. Thank you very much indeed for your attendance.